The humble Father Marcus Johnson was not the kind of man who cared about shining suits, fancy cars, or people's opinions. He was a black single father, living in a quiet neighborhood with his teenage son Elijah. Life had not always been easy for him. He had faced long years of struggle, working 2 jobs, saving every penny, and raising his boy alone after his wife left when Elijah was just a child. But Marcus never complained. He believed in hard work, respect, and staying humble, no matter what came his way. Every morning, Marcus drove Elijah to school in his old pickup truck. The truck was scratched, the paint was dull, and the air conditioner barely worked in the hot summer. Elijah sometimes wished his father had a nicer car, especially when he saw his classmates being dropped off in shiny SUVs and expensive sedans. But Marcus never seemed to mind. He would say, "Son, a car is meant to take you from one place to another. It doesn't make you better or worse than anyone else." Marcus worked in simple clothes, faded jeans, a plain shirt, and strong boots. To anyone watching, he looked like a man just struggling to survive. The truth, however, was very different. Marcus owned a real estate and construction company. Over the years, he had bought old buildings, repaired them, and turned them into successful businesses and homes. Quietly, he had built wealth that most people couldn't even imagine, but he never showed it. He didn't wear designer watches, he didn't boast about his money, and he didn't try to prove himself to anyone. What mattered most to Marcus was his son. Elijah was his pride and joy. He worked late into the night so that his boy could have everything he needed. He made sure Elijah stayed focused on his studies, taught him respect for others, and reminded him that kindness was more valuable than riches. Yet Elijah sometimes struggled to understand why his father lived so simply when he could easily afford more. At school, Elijah's classmates often whispered about Marcus. They noticed his old truck and his plain clothes. Some of them laughed and called him the poor dad. The arrogant kids raised in wealthy homes thought Marcus was nothing but a struggling man who had no place among them. Elijah heard the jokes, and though it hurt him, he never told his father. He knew Marcus wouldn't care, and that only made Elijah respect him more. Despite the gossip and judgment, Marcus carried himself with quiet dignity. Whenever he met teachers, he greeted them warmly. Whenever he passed the janitor or the cafeteria workers, he smiled and asked how their day was going. He treated everyone the same, whether rich or poor, respected or ignored. This puzzled many people because they couldn't understand why a man who seemed so ordinary walked with such quiet confidence. One evening, as Marcus prepared dinner in their small but cozy kitchen, Elijah finally asked him something that had been weighing on his heart. "Dad," he said softly, "don't you ever feel embarrassed? The way people look at you, the way they laugh at your truck and clothes." Marcus paused, setting down the pan, and turned to face his son. His eyes were calm, but there was a firmness in his voice. "Elijah, listen to me. People can laugh at your shoes, your house, even your skin color, but none of that defines who you are. What matters is the kind of person you choose to be. You can spend your life trying to impress others, or you can spend it building something real. I choose the second." Elijah nodded, though part of him still wished his father would show the world who he really was. But Marcus believed that real strength didn't need to shout. It simply existed, steady and unshaken. The next day, Marcus arrived at Elijah's school for a parent meeting. Once again, the wealthy parents gathered in their stylish clothes, wearing expensive watches and chatting about vacations abroad. When Marcus walked in, the room grew quiet for a moment. Some of the parents glanced at each other and smirked, whispering behind their hands. Marcus noticed, but he paid no mind. He walked straight to Elijah's teacher, shook her hand with a smile, and asked about his son's progress. The teacher respected Marcus deeply. She knew he was always present, always concerned about Elijah's future. She also noticed how he treated her with kindness, unlike some parents who spoke down to teachers as if they were servants. As Marcus left the school that day, he saw Elijah standing near his friends. A few of them were laughing quietly, pointing at his truck. Marcus didn't react. Instead, he called Elijah over and said, "Ready to go, son?" His voice was calm, almost cheerful, as if the laughter didn't exist. On the drive home, Elijah stayed silent, but inside he felt a storm. He wanted to defend his father, to tell his friends the truth, that Marcus wasn't poor, that he was more successful than all their parents combined. But Elijah also remembered his father's words. Dignity was not about proving others wrong. That night, Marcus sat at his desk, going over paperwork for his company. The numbers on the page showed millions of dollars in assets and profits. But to him, they were just numbers. What mattered most was that he could pay Elijah's school fees, save for his future, and give him a good life. Marcus leaned back in his chair, smiling softly. He knew people would never understand him until the right moment came, but he wasn't in a hurry. Life always revealed the truth sooner or later, and for Marcus, staying humble was not just a choice, it was his way of life. The cruel invitation. The school year was moving quickly, and Elijah's class was preparing for a big social event, a weekend dinner hosted by some of the wealthiest families. These events were less about friendship and more about showing off. The parents often used them to brag about their careers, their vacations, and their bank accounts. Children, too, copied their parents' arrogance, learning to measure worth by material things. Among Elijah's classmates was a small group of students who never missed a chance to mock him. They had noticed how his father, Marcus, always appeared in simple clothes and drove the same old pickup. To them, Marcus was a man to laugh at, not to respect. They whispered about him behind Elijah's back, calling him the poor single dad. One afternoon during lunch break, those classmates sat together plotting. "We should invite Elijah's dad to the dinner this weekend," one of them said with a wicked grin. "Imagine him walking in with that rusty truck of his. Everyone will see what kind of family Elijah comes from," another laughed. "Yes, my parents would find it hilarious. He'll look so out of place in a room full of businessmen and rich families." And so the plan was set, not out of kindness, but cruelty. The invitation was handed to Elijah as if it were an honor, but behind the smiles of his classmates there was hidden malice. When Elijah brought the invitation home, he was hesitant. He had seen enough mockery from those kids to know this was no genuine gesture. He handed the envelope to his father with a half-hearted shrug. "Dad, they invited you to the class dinner this Saturday," he said slowly. Marcus opened the invitation and read it carefully. His calm face revealed nothing. "That's nice of them," he said simply. "A chance to meet other parents, maybe make some connections." Elijah frowned. "I don't think it's what you think, Dad. They don't respect us. They just want to laugh at you." "I know them." Marcus looked at his son, his expression soft but steady. "Son, if people want to laugh, let them laugh. Their laughter doesn't change who I am. What matters is that I show up for you. If your classmates' parents will be there, then I should be there too. You deserve to have your father stand beside you." Elijah wanted to argue, but deep down he knew his father was right. Still, his heart sank at the thought of what might happen. Saturday evening came quickly. Marcus prepared carefully, though not in the way others expected. He pulled out his best suit, a modest gray one he had owned for years. It was clean and well-pressed, though not expensive. He polished his shoes until they shone, combed his short hair neatly, and stood tall before the mirror. "Are you ready, son?" Marcus asked, smiling as Elijah adjusted his own shirt nervously. "Yes," Elijah muttered, though his stomach twisted with dread. When they arrived at the grand house where the dinner was being held, the contrast was glaring. Luxury cars lined the driveway, sleek black sedans, gleaming sports cars, and SUVs that looked brand new. Marcus pulled in with his old pickup, parking at the end. Heads turned immediately. Parents glanced, then looked again, whispering quietly to one another. Some children smirked, nudging their friends. Inside, the house was full of chandeliers, golden frames, and tables dressed in white silk. Waiters in black uniforms carried trays of sparkling drinks and appetizers. Marcus walked in confidently, greeting the hosts with a firm handshake and a polite smile. The other parents offered stiff nods, their eyes scanning his plain suit. Some whispered comments floated in the air. That must be Elijah's father. "Did you see his truck outside? Poor man. Raising a child alone must be so hard for him." The children laughed quietly, sneaking glances at Elijah. He clenched his fists, wishing he could disappear. Marcus, however, seemed unaffected. He walked with quiet dignity, his back straight, his presence calm. The dinner began with chatter about vacations in Europe, private schools, and business deals. One father bragged about a $3 million investment in real estate. Another mother spoke proudly about her designer dress collection. When Marcus was asked what he did for work, he smiled modestly. "I build things," he said simply. houses, buildings, places where families can live and grow. The response drew polite chuckles from some parents, who assumed he was just a construction worker struggling to make ends meet. One leaned toward another and whispered, "See? I told you. He's just labor, not management." Elijah's face burned with anger, but Marcus only nodded calmly, sipping his water as if nothing had been said. As the evening went on, the mockery grew subtler but sharper. Parents boasted louder when Marcus was near, as if to emphasize their own superiority. Children made small jokes Elijah could hear, yet Marcus remained steady, offering kind words to the servers, thanking the hosts, and listening quietly to every story told around the table. Elijah, watching his father, felt torn. On one side he was embarrassed and angry. On the other, he couldn't ignore the calm strength radiating from Marcus. His father wasn't shrinking under their judgment. He was rising above it. The night ended with fake smiles and shallow goodbyes. Marcus shook hands with the hosts once more, thanked them sincerely, and walked out with his son. Behind them, whispers followed, full of laughter and arrogance. On the way home, Elijah finally broke the silence. "Dad, why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you tell them who you really are? You could have shut them all up." Marcus glanced at his son, his voice calm and wise. "Elijah, you don't go to a fool's house to prove your worth. If you know who you are, you don't need to shout it. The truth always comes out in its own time." Elijah sat quietly, his father's words sinking deep into his heart. He didn't realize then, but this dinner, born from arrogance and mockery, was only the beginning of a lesson the entire class and their parents would never forget. The mockery begins. The night of the dinner had only just started, but the whispers had already begun to circle like bees around honey. Marcus and Elijah sat at a round table near the corner of the grand dining hall, surrounded by crystal glasses, polished silverware, and parents dressed in designer clothes. The chandeliers above sparkled, reflecting the golden tones of the wealthy families who believed they owned the room. Marcus's presence, however, created an invisible line. Though he smiled warmly and greeted people with courtesy, many of the parents avoided eye contact. To them, he was not one of them. He was the outsider, the poor single dad who had somehow found his way into their glittering circle. Elijah felt the sting of their glances. Every time someone whispered and laughed quietly, he knew it was about his father. His classmates sat at a nearby table, nudging each other and giggling, their eyes darting toward Marcus. One boy leaned over to his friend and whispered just loud enough, "Hey, maybe he'll fix the driveway before dessert." Laughter followed, small but sharp. Marcus heard it. He always heard such things, but instead of frowning, he only smiled faintly and continued cutting his food. His calmness was like a shield, and yet Elijah's heart burned with anger. The host of the evening, Mr. Whitman, a tall man with a booming voice and a gold watch flashing on his wrist, stood to speak. "We are delighted to welcome all the parents tonight. It's wonderful to see our children growing together in such an environment of excellence and success." His words dripped with pride, and his eyes scanned the room, lingering for a moment on Marcus as though silently questioning his place there. As the meal went on, conversations turned louder. Parents bragged about their businesses, luxury cars, and vacation homes. Each story seemed crafted to top the one before. "My husband just closed a deal in Dubai," one mother said with her nose tilted high. "Well, we just bought our third property in Miami," another replied quickly. "Oh, my son is going to Paris for summer training." "Very exclusive," someone else added with a smirk. Then, as if on cue, one of the children piped up loudly from the kids' table, "Elijah's dad drives a truck. A really old one." The table erupted in laughter, and though the adults tried to cover their chuckles behind their glasses, some didn't even bother. Elijah's face went red with shame and fury. He wanted to shout back, to tell them that his father was worth more than all of them combined. But when he looked at Marcus, his father's calm eyes met his. Marcus gave a slight shake of his head as if to say, "Don't waste your breath on foolishness." One of the fathers leaned in across the table, pretending politeness. "So, Marcus, what exactly do you do for work?" "Construction, was it?" His tone was smooth, but the hidden mockery was sharp. Marcus set down his fork, wiped his hands with the napkin, and answered in his steady voice, I build homes. I build spaces where people can live and create memories." The man chuckled. "Ah, noble work. Hard work too, I imagine. My company hires men like you all the time. It's not easy being in labor." Several parents smiled knowingly, satisfied with their assumption. Elijah gripped his chair tightly, his teeth clenched. But Marcus didn't flinch. He only nodded. "Yes, hard work builds character, and when you love what you do, it doesn't feel heavy at all." The comment silenced the table for a moment, but soon the chatter returned. The parents went back to their endless cycle of boasting, while the children whispered and pointed. During dessert, the mockery grew bolder. One boy asked, "Mr. Johnson, do you ever get tired of driving that truck? Doesn't it break down all the time?" The table chuckled, and even a few parents laughed quietly. Marcus looked at the boy with kindness instead of irritation. "That truck has carried me through many storms," he said. "It may not shine like your father's car, but it has never failed me when I needed it." The boy blinked, confused by the answer. He had expected anger or embarrassment, but instead he found wisdom. Still, the others laughed anyway, blind to the weight of Marcus's words. Elijah, however, heard them deeply. He realized his father wasn't simply ignoring the insults, he was teaching by example. Marcus was showing him that dignity didn't bend under laughter, and worth didn't shrink under judgment. As the evening drew to a close, the families gathered in small groups talking about future trips and opportunities. Marcus and Elijah stood quietly near the door, waiting to thank the hosts before leaving. Behind them, voices carried. "Poor man, raising a son alone must be such a burden. Imagine living like that. I'd rather die than drive that kind of truck. He doesn't belong in this circle. He'll never fit in." Marcus heard it all, but his face remained calm. He turned to Elijah and whispered, "Do you see, son? Their words say more about them than about us." Elijah swallowed hard. For the first time, he understood what his father meant when he said dignity wasn't about proving others wrong. Still, a part of him longed for the day when these arrogant people would see the truth. When Marcus finally shook hands with the host and walked out into the night, his back was straight, his step steady as if he carried no weight at all. But Elijah knew better. His father carried something greater than wealth or status. He carried unshakable pride in who he was. What Elijah didn't know yet was that soon, very soon, the truth would reveal itself. And the same people who mocked his father tonight would one day bow their heads in shame. The father's grace. The dinner was halfway through, and though the room sparkled with chandeliers and laughter, Marcus stood out like a single calm note in a noisy song. Where others tried to outshine one another with loud stories and expensive jewelry, Marcus carried himself with a quiet dignity that seemed almost out of place. He didn't need to raise his voice or flash wealth. His grace came from something deeper. Elijah, sitting beside his father, noticed it immediately. While the other parents bragged and argued about their luxury vacations, Marcus listened attentively. He nodded politely, never interrupting, and asked gentle questions that made people pause. "How did you enjoy that trip? What was the most memorable part?" His interest felt genuine, unlike the shallow pride that filled the air. Some parents brushed him off, unwilling to share more than their bragging rights. Others answered quickly, unsure how to respond to a man they thought beneath them. Yet the servers in black uniforms moving quietly around the room noticed. When Marcus said thank you and looked them in the eye, it surprised them. They were used to being invisible. For Marcus, however, no one was beneath notice. At one point, a young waiter accidentally spilled a few drops of water onto the white tablecloth near Marcus's plate. The boy's face turned pale, expecting sharp words or embarrassment. Instead, Marcus smiled kindly and said, "Don't worry about it, son. Accidents happen to the best of us." He even took a napkin himself and helped dab at the table. The waiter's shoulders relaxed instantly and gratitude filled his eyes. Across the room, some of the wealthy parents noticed this small act. A few rolled their eyes. "How simple," one whispered, "helping the help like that." But others, though unwilling to admit it, felt a small sting of shame. They realized they couldn't remember the last time they had thanked a server. Elijah's classmates, still whispering and giggling, watched too. They couldn't understand why Marcus wasn't angry, why he didn't try to defend himself. To them, strength meant showing power, money, or status. Yet Marcus showed none of that, and still he seemed untouchable. Later in the evening, the conversation turned to schools and children's futures. Parents boasted about sending their kids abroad for education. One man spoke loudly about hiring private tutors who charged thousands of dollars a month. Another boasted of his daughter's horseback training with a champion rider. When someone turned to Marcus and asked, "And what about Elijah? Do you have special plans for him?" The question carried a mocking tone, as if expecting Marcus to say something small. Marcus's face softened. He glanced at his son, pride shining in his eyes. "My plan," he said slowly, "is to raise a young man who knows the value of respect. Whether he studies here or anywhere else, what matters most is his character. If he grows into a kind, strong, and wise man, then I will have succeeded as his father." The room grew strangely quiet for a moment. His words, though simple, carried a weight that none of the expensive stories could match. Some parents shifted uncomfortably, as if reminded of something they had forgotten long ago. Elijah, hearing those words, felt his chest swell with pride. For the first time that evening, he was glad his father hadn't shouted back or shown off. But the arrogant ones couldn't let the silence last. One of the mothers laughed lightly and said, "That's very sweet. But in this world, money speaks louder than character." Several nodded in agreement, their smirks returning. Marcus did not argue. Instead, he smiled faintly, as though he knew something they didn't. His calm response unsettled them more than anger ever could. Throughout the night, Marcus's grace shone in little ways. When a chair wobbled under an elderly guest, Marcus was the first to steady it. When a child dropped his spoon, Marcus picked it up with a smile and handed it back. He never made a scene, but his actions left impressions. Elijah noticed the pattern. While others tried to shine with wealth, his father quietly shined with humanity. By the time dessert was served, something had shifted in the atmosphere. A few of the servers lingered near Marcus's side of the table, smiling when he spoke. A couple of parents, though still proud, had started speaking to him with less sarcasm. His humility confused them. They expected a man embarrassed, desperate to prove himself, but what they found instead was a man at peace. When the event drew toward its end, the host raised his glass and proposed a toast. Everyone lifted their glasses of sparkling wine. Marcus raised his glass of water with the same respect. "To success, wealth, and growth," Mr. Whitman declared. "To success," the crowd echoed. Marcus added quietly, though not to be heard by all, "and to kindness, without which success is empty." Elijah caught the words and smiled secretly. His father was teaching him again, not through lectures, but through quiet strength. As guests began leaving, Marcus shook hands with everyone he passed. Some still gave him cold smiles, but a few looked him in the eye for the first time, uncertain, as though beginning to wonder if they had misjudged him. Walking out under the night sky, Elijah felt lighter than he had at the start of the evening. "Dad," he said softly, "you didn't even let them touch you. They tried, but they couldn't." Marcus placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Son, people can only touch you if you let their words inside your heart. If your heart stays clean, no insult can stain it." Elijah thought about it the whole ride home. His father's grace had turned an evening of mockery into something far more powerful, a lesson. What Elijah didn't know yet was that the seeds planted that night would soon bloom into a revelation that would shake every arrogant smile in that room. The subtle reveal. The dinner was nearly over, but conversations around the long tables were still alive with the same rhythm of arrogance. Parents compared their latest business ventures, their expensive hobbies, and their overseas homes as if they were trophies meant to silence others. Marcus, however, remained a quiet listener, never once joining the competition of voices. It was during the second round of coffee that the evening took an unexpected turn. A heavy-set man in a navy blue suit, Mr. Harrison, leaned back in his chair and boomed, "Well, I suppose none of us had a bigger deal this year than me. Closed a property investment worth $5 million. Took months of paperwork and negotiations, but it's done." He puffed out his chest like a peacock. Several parents clapped politely. "Impressive," one muttered, though their tone carried jealousy more than admiration. Then, with sly amusement, Mr. Harrison turned his gaze toward Marcus. "And you, Marcus," he said loudly, "what kind of projects do you get your hands on? You mentioned you build houses, was it?" His voice stretched the word houses like it was a joke. The table grew quiet, waiting for Marcus to stumble, waiting to enjoy his discomfort. Elijah stiffened beside his father, his hands tightening around his napkin. Marcus placed his coffee cup gently back onto its saucer. His calm eyes met Harrison's, and in his usual soft voice, he replied, "Yes, I've been fortunate enough to work on a few developments. Nothing too dramatic. Just old buildings turned into places where families can live or start businesses. Small things that grow over time." Harrison chuckled, waving his hand as if dismissing Marcus's words. "Small things," he repeated with a smirk. Well, not all of us can handle the big leagues, but Marcus didn't respond with anger or pride. Instead, he leaned back slightly and asked a simple question. "Out of curiosity, Mr. Harrison, when you invested those $5 million, what did you focus on? Location, value, or community impact?" The question caught Harrison off guard. He blinked, then muttered, "Location, of course. That's where the money is." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, location is key. But if you focus only on location, you miss the heart of the investment. People live in those places, raise children there, create stories. When you give them more than walls, when you build a community, the value doesn't just rise in numbers, it rises in meaning." The table grew strangely still. A few of the parents leaned in slightly, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Marcus's words didn't sound like those of a man struggling in labor. They sounded like the voice of someone who understood the language of success. Elijah noticed it too. For the first time that evening, a few heads turned not with mockery but with genuine interest. Mrs. Daniels, a sharp-eyed woman who owned a chain of boutiques, tilted her head. "You speak as though you've handled more than just small houses," she said carefully. "Have you been in the business long?" Marcus gave a gentle smile. "Long enough to learn patience. When I started, I could only buy a small house, fix it, and rent it. I didn't have much then, but I believed growth comes one brick at a time. Now I look back and see that those small steps created something larger." The simplicity of his tone made it sound ordinary, but the weight of his words hinted at something deeper. Some parents exchanged puzzled glances. "Something larger?" Mr. Whitman, the host, asked curiously. "How large are we talking?" Marcus shrugged lightly, refusing to boast. "Large enough to keep me busy. Large enough to keep my son's future secure. That's all that matters to me." For the first time, the smug smiles at the table faltered. It was as though Marcus had lifted a curtain for just a moment, revealing a glimpse of something hidden. Elijah's heart raced. He could see the shift happening. His father's wisdom, his calm authority, it wasn't the voice of a poor man trying to fit in. It was the voice of someone who carried true power, but didn't feel the need to flaunt it. Still, some of the arrogant ones clung to their pride. Mr. Harrison leaned forward again, determined to bring the attention back to himself. "Well, words are easy. At the end of the day, money speaks." Marcus smiled faintly, his voice calm as ever. "Yes, money speaks, but character decides what it says." The words landed like a quiet thunder. Nobody laughed this time. Even the children at the nearby table sensed the change, falling briefly silent as if they too could feel the shift in the air. As the evening wound down, Marcus excused himself politely to thank the servers for their hard work. While the other parents barely nodded at the staff, Marcus shook hands with them and spoke to them with genuine warmth. The waiter smiled, almost glowing, as if his words mattered more than the grand gestures of the rich guests. Elijah walked beside his father, his chest swelling with pride. He realized something important. His father hadn't needed to reveal numbers, titles, or flashy possessions. With only a few thoughtful sentences and his natural dignity, Marcus had planted doubt in the minds of the arrogant. By the time Marcus and Elijah stepped out into the cool night air, a quiet buzz had begun behind them. Parents whispered to one another, suddenly curious about the man they had laughed at only hours earlier. Who exactly was Marcus Johnson? How did he carry such wisdom? And what was he hiding behind that calm smile? Elijah looked up at his father as they walked toward the old pickup truck. "Dad," he said softly, "you didn't even tell them the truth, and yet—" They couldn't laugh anymore. Marcus placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "The truth doesn't need to be shouted, Elijah. Even a whisper of it has power." Elijah smiled to himself. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel ashamed of the old truck or the plain suit, or the silence his father carried. He felt proud, because tonight the mask of arrogance had cracked and soon the full truth would shine through. The shocking discovery. The night of the dinner ended quietly for Marcus and Elijah, but for many of the other families it left behind a puzzle. The man they had mocked so freely, The one they had thought was poor and struggling had spoken with the wisdom and confidence of someone who knew far more than he showed. He hadn't bragged, he hadn't defended himself, but a few of his words lingered like echoes in their minds. As the families drove home in their luxury cars, conversations began. "Did you hear the way he spoke about investments? That didn't sound like a laborer," one mother said sharply. "Maybe he's just good at pretending," another father muttered, though doubt tinged his voice. Mrs. Daniels, the boutique owner, shook her head. "No, that man has experience. I've dealt with enough businessmen to know when someone speaks from knowledge, not theory." By the time morning came, curiosity had turned into suspicion. And suspicion, in the age of the internet, led quickly to discovery. It was Mr. Harrison, the boastful investor, who decided to search first. He sat at his desk with his laptop, still irritated that Marcus had stolen a moment of respect at the dinner. With a few clicks, he typed the name, Marcus Johnson. At first, dozens of ordinary names appeared, but then one link caught his attention. An article in a business magazine, Marcus Johnson, the quiet builder who changed communities. Harrison frowned and clicked it open. His eyes widened as he read. The article detailed how Marcus had started with a single rundown property, fixed it himself, and slowly expanded into a real estate empire that stretched across multiple states. His company had built affordable housing, renovated old neighborhoods, and even developed shopping centers. The estimated value of his holdings over $100 million, Harrison sat back in shock. The man they had laughed at, the man in the worn suit and old pickup truck, was wealthier than all of them combined. Word spread quickly. Within hours, other parents were making the same discovery. Screens lit up with pictures of Marcus standing beside community leaders, shaking hands with mayors, cutting ribbons at housing projects. There were articles about his donations to schools, scholarships for underprivileged children, and his quiet philanthropy that had touched countless lives. One parent muttered in disbelief, "We mocked a man who gave millions to education while we bragged about vacations." Another whispered, "He could buy and sell all of us if he wanted to." By the next school day, whispers had taken over the hallways. The children who had once mocked Elijah now stared at him with wide eyes. Some tried to act friendly, asking casual questions. "Hey, is it true your dad's like super rich?" Others avoided him altogether, embarrassed by their cruelty. Elijah, walking through the halls, felt the shift. For years he had endured the teasing, the whispers, the laughter aimed at his father. Now the same mouths were silent. He didn't gloat, but deep inside he felt a sense of justice. The parents, however, were not so calm. At the next PTA meeting, several of them gathered nervously before Marcus arrived. "What do we say to him?" one asked. "We can't just ignore it." "He knows we mocked him," another replied. Mrs. Daniels sighed. "The man showed more class than any of us. He won't throw it in our faces. That's the difference. He doesn't need to." When Marcus entered the room, dressed as simply as always, the parents froze. Some stood quickly, offering handshakes that were too eager. Others mumbled awkward greetings. The same people who once looked at him with disdain now looked at him with respect, mixed with guilt. Marcus greeted them all the same way he always had, calm, polite, and warm. He didn't bring up the dinner, didn't mention the articles, and didn't show even a trace of pride. To him, nothing had changed, but to them, everything had. Mr. Harrison, red-faced and sweating, finally spoke. "Marcus, I didn't realize, you never said—" Marcus raised a hand gently, stopping him. "There was nothing to say, Mr. Harrison. A man's worth is not in what he tells others. It's in how he lives." The room fell silent. No one dared to argue. That evening, Elijah sat with his father at home, scrolling through the articles on his phone. "Dad, they all know now," he said quietly. "They know who you really are." Marcus looked up from his paperwork, his expression calm. "Does it matter, son?" Elijah hesitated. "Maybe not to you, but to me it feels like justice." Marcus smiled faintly. "Justice doesn't come from others realizing your worth. Justice comes from never forgetting it yourself. Their laughter didn't change me, and their respect won't change me either. What matters is that we keep living with dignity." Elijah thought about this for a long moment. He realized that his father had never been trying to hide his wealth. It was simply never the most important part of who he was. The shocking discovery had humbled the arrogant parents. But for Marcus, it was just another day. He knew that wealth was not measured in dollars alone. It was measured in the lives touched, the lessons taught, and the legacy left behind, and in that sense, Marcus was richer than anyone in the room, richer than they could ever hope to be. The tables turn. The discovery of Marcus's true identity spread like wildfire. By the end of the week, every parent at the school knew the truth. The quiet single father they had mocked was, in fact, a man of extraordinary success. His company was worth more than $100 million. His influence reached far beyond their small community, and his generosity had changed lives across the state. The arrogant laughter that had once followed Marcus was replaced with hushed respect and nervous curiosity. The same parents who used to glance at his old truck with smirks now avoided making eye contact, embarrassed by their own actions. But for some, embarrassment quickly turned into something else: opportunity. At the next school function, the air was different. Parents who had once ignored Marcus now crowded around him with forced smiles. "Mr. Johnson," said Mr. Harrison, the man who once mocked him the loudest, "I've been meaning to talk to you. I think we could collaborate on some property deals. With your experience and my contacts, it could be a perfect match." Marcus shook his hand politely but said nothing more than, "I'll think about it." His tone was calm, neither warm nor cold, but it left Harrison unsettled. Mrs. Daniels, the boutique owner, chimed in next. "Marcus, you simply must let me introduce you to some of my friends in the business world. People would be thrilled to meet you." Marcus only smiled faintly. "I appreciate that." Soon nearly every parent was hovering, offering favors, inviting him to exclusive events, and pretending they had respected him all along. It was as if the entire room had turned upside down. The same people who had laughed at his clothes and truck now wanted a piece of his success. Elijah, standing nearby, watched with mixed feelings. For years he had seen these very people look down on his father, and now they were desperate for his attention. He wanted Marcus to call them out, to remind them of their cruelty. But his father never did. Instead, Marcus treated them with the same steady politeness he always had. He did not gloat, he did not scold, and he did not expose their hypocrisy. To him, their change of attitude was not a victory. It was a reflection of their weakness. Later that evening, Elijah whispered to his father, "Why are you being so kind to them? They don't deserve it. They mocked you, and now they're only pretending to like you because of your money." Marcus placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Son, kindness is not a gift you give only to those who deserve it. It is a reflection of who you are. If I change because of their behavior, then I let them control me. I will not let pride or anger guide me." Elijah fell silent. He was learning again. Another quiet lesson his father lived rather than spoke. But while Marcus remained calm, the other parents could not hide their desperation. At community events, they tried to sit beside him. At PTA meetings, they sought his approval. Some even sent gifts to Elijah, hoping it would win Marcus's favor. One day, Mr. Whitman, the wealthy host of the dinner, approached Marcus privately. "Marcus," he began, clearing his throat nervously, "I want to apologize. I misjudged you. We all did. I hope you'll forgive us." Marcus looked at him steadily. "There is nothing to forgive. You revealed who you were, and I revealed who I am. Life has a way of showing the truth in time." Whitman swallowed hard, realizing the depth of those words. The tables had truly turned. Where once Marcus had been the outsider mocked for his simplicity, now he was the center of attention. But unlike the others, he did not seek to gain from the shift. He continued to drive his old truck, wear his modest clothes, and live as humbly as before. This unsettled the arrogant parents even more. They couldn't understand why a man of such wealth refused to flaunt it. They couldn't comprehend how someone so powerful had no need for their approval. For Elijah, however, it became a source of pride. Walking beside his father at school events, he no longer felt shame. He felt honored. He realized that his father's true strength was not his money, but his unshakable dignity. Still, there were moments when Elijah saw the discomfort in the faces of those who had once mocked them. Their forced smiles, their desperate attempts to impress Marcus, it was a silent justice. Without raising his voice, without revealing his wealth at the dinner, Marcus had let the truth rise on its own, and now, those who laughed were humbled without him saying a word. The tables had turned completely. The powerful ones were now small. The mocked man was now admired. And yet Marcus himself remained unchanged, proving to everyone, especially his son, that greatness was not in wealth, but in character, the lasting lesson. The whispers faded over the weeks, but the memory of that dinner and the shocking discovery never left the school community. Parents who once mocked Marcus now treated him with cautious respect, and children who had laughed at Elijah now avoided crossing him. But Marcus never changed. He still drove the same old truck, wore his modest suits, and lived with the same quiet grace that had carried him through every hardship of life. To Marcus, wealth had never been a shield or a crown. It was only a tool, something to build with, and though the world around him had shifted, he remained steady. That steadiness was the true lesson that would last long after the mockery was forgotten. One afternoon, Elijah sat with his father on the porch of their small but warm home. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and orange. Elijah had been thinking about everything that had happened, the cruel invitation, the mocking dinner, the shocking reveal, and the sudden change in how people treated them. "Dad," he said quietly, "why didn't you tell them from the start? Why didn't you just say, 'I'm worth $100 million,' and stop them from laughing?" Marcus looked at the horizon for a long moment before answering. "Because, Elijah, their laughter was never about me. It was about who they are. If I had shouted my worth that night, what lesson would it have given you? That we prove ourselves with numbers? No. I wanted you to see that real dignity doesn't come from showing others your bank account. It comes from living in a way that even laughter cannot shake." Elijah nodded slowly, his chest swelling with a mix of pride and understanding. He realized his father had not endured the mockery out of weakness. He had endured it out of strength. The following week at school, one of Elijah's classmates approached him. It was the same boy who had laughed the loudest at the dinner. His face was red, his eyes downcast. "Elijah," he mumbled, "I'm sorry. About what I said about your dad. I didn't know." For a moment, Elijah wanted to snap back to remind him of every cruel word. But then he remembered his father's lesson. Dignity was not about revenge. So he simply nodded and said, "It's okay. Just don't do it again." The boy walked away, humbled, and Elijah felt something stronger than victory. He felt peace. Meanwhile, the parents continued to treat Marcus with newfound respect. Some of them, genuinely embarrassed by their behavior, began to reflect on their own arrogance. A few even changed the way they treated others, thanking the school staff, listening more to their children, and speaking with a little more humility. Others, however, remained the same. They pretended kindness but still lived with envy and pride. Yet even their hypocrisy only served to highlight the contrast between their fragile pride and Marcus's steady grace. One evening, the school held another gathering, this time a fundraiser for building a new library. Marcus attended, dressed as simply as always. But this time the atmosphere was different. Instead of laughter and mockery, there was anticipation. Everyone wanted to see what Marcus would do. When the time came for pledges, parents announced donations proudly. 5,000, 10,000, 20,000. Each one looked around, hoping for applause. Then Marcus stood, his calm voice carrying across the room. "Education builds futures," he said. "Every child deserves access to knowledge, no matter their background." He paused, then added, "I will fund the full cost of the library." The room went silent. The host stammered, "Mr. Johnson, that's nearly $2 million. Marcus nodded simply. "Then let's build it." The applause that followed was thunderous, but Marcus did not raise his chin or bask in the admiration. He sat back down quietly, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. For Elijah, that moment was the true victory. Not the reveal of wealth, not the silence of their mockers, but the way his father used his success to serve others without needing praise. He realized that his father's legacy would not just be measured in money, but in kindness, wisdom, and the countless lives touched by his quiet generosity. That night, as they drove home in the same old truck, Elijah turned to his father and said softly, "Dad, I understand now. You don't just build houses. You build respect. You build futures." Marcus smiled, his eyes glistening with pride. "That's the only kind of wealth that lasts, son." And so the story ended, not with Marcus proving his worth to the arrogant, but with him teaching his son and everyone who watched that true greatness lies not in riches or recognition, but in the character that endures when the world tries to mock you. The classmates, the parents, The community. They would remember Marcus Johnson not as the man they once ridiculed, but as the man who revealed to them the most important lesson of all. Dignity is the richest wealth and kindness is the greatest legacy.